Welcome back everyone. In this video we'll be installing the V3 kit for the Apollo Ghost. Now this kit is compatible with both the 2021 and 2022 model, so if you have either or, you're good to go. The tools you're going to need for this is electrical tape, some zip ties, flush cutters, a Phillips head screwdriver, an X-Acto knife, a 7mm wrench, a 2.5, 3, 4, and 5mm Allen or hex key. Now the first step will be to remove the two grip tape strips to get access to the deck screws. For this, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to lift the grip tape and then gently pull it off to not rip it. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side. Now for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be using a battery drill and hex bits, but Allen keys will do the trick just as well. So what we'll need is a 5mm Allen key or hex bit to remove the hook on the deck. We'll just put that to the side for now. And now I'm going to grab my 2.5mm to remove all the deck screws. There we go. Now we'll put the drill to the side, take our X-Acto knife, and gently lift the deck plate just like this. Now we'll pull it to the back, and as you can see, some of the deck seal is sticking to it, so we just need to pull a little bit. Now that we've taken off the deck plate, we can now remove these little foam pieces here. Now we do have to be gentle because the wires are often stuck to them. So we'll pull them back, but we don't want to remove them completely. If they do come away from the battery, it's not the end of the world. We can just stick them back on as I'm going to show you right now. So being gentle, just like this, we can put them back on afterwards. Now the next step will be to start pulling wires out of the deck to get access to our battery connectors. Here's our first one that will disconnect just like this. And then our second one is snug along the side of the controller right here. So we'll gently pull this one out, just like that. We'll disconnect this one as well. Now the next step will be to take our front deck tray off to get access to our charging port connectors. Now to remove the front deck tray, we'll need to remove the 9 Phillips head screws, the 1 on the side, the 3 on the bottom, the 1 on the other side, and the 4 on the top. We'll now start with the 2 on the top. We'll now remove the 1 on the side. And now I'll repeat the process on the other side, then move to the bottom. Now that all the screws are out, we can gently pull the deck tray away from the deck. As you'll see, the front suspension might get in the way, so we'll just twist this to the side so we can pull the deck tray out completely, just like that. Now that our deck tray is off, we can pull out our motor cable. Just like this. We'll need to be careful not to rip any wires by accident. So now what we have left is the rear LED and our hydraulic brake line. But if we look inside, we'll see where our charging port wires are. If you don't see them, you can feel around with your fingers and gently pull them out. Now, just like the battery connectors, the 2 wires are red and black. There we go. As we can see, our 2 connectors coming out. So we'll disconnect both of these, just like this, and we'll pull them out into the deck. That's one, and that's two. Now that all of our battery connectors and charging port connectors are free, we will remove the battery from the deck. Now, to take the battery out of the deck, what we'll need to do is take our connectors and gently pull the battery out, just like this. Now, make sure your scooter is not too far forward so it doesn't fall, and we'll just back it up, just in case, like that. Now I'll put the battery off to the side, and we'll get started on our controllers. So to start disconnecting the controllers, first we'll take out the motor connector for the front motor. There we go. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. After we've disconnected our two motor cables, we'll need to start working on the controllers. But first, let's start with the light box. So what we'll need to do is take a pair of flush cutters and cut away the zip ties holding the connectors together. Now, you can be careful with these if you want to keep them as backups, but if you plan on throwing them in the trash, you can simply move along and disconnect everything. So the connectors going to the light box or the transformer are all the LEDs, as well as the LED strips on the bottom of the scooter. So we'll just keep working through these, just like this. And for the last one, there we go. Now we'll put our light box to the side. What I like to do with the controllers is to remove them from the front of the deck to have more space. Just like that. Now, when pulling apart these connectors, we also want to make sure we're not pulling from the wire, but from the connector itself. So as you can see, the two ears on the side of the connectors, as well as the clip holding them together. So we'll push on the clip and then pull on the two ears to not damage any wires, because we do need the wires coming down from the handlebars to connect to our new controller. And don't worry, I'll walk you through what these connectors do when we start connecting them to the new Mach 1 controller. Clip this one out. just like that. And now what we'll need to do to remove the front controller is to pull our motor cable through the side of the deck. Now, as you can see, our front controller is now free. So we'll put this to the side as well. Now we'll finish up on the rear controller. So we'll disconnect our COM cable right here. And lastly, we'll remove our single dual switch, just like that. Now that all of our connectors are free, we'll be able to repeat the same process and take motor cable out, just like this. And just like that, our rear controller is free. Now that we've taken out the battery, the controllers, and the light box, what we'll need to do is cut this wire harness free so we can pull out the old components that we won't need anymore. For this, I'm going to use flush cutters and just cut the zip ties holding this harness to the scooter. Now that the harness itself is free, we'll remove the dust shield and the plastic cover. So for this, we'll cut the zip tie holding these two covers together. So once we have all of our zip ties cut away, we can start unraveling the harness cover. Now we can leave the motor cable cover on. We don't need to touch this one, so we'll just keep unraveling up top to the stem. Now that our harness cover is out, we can take away the tape holding the harness together. And don't worry too much about this tape. We can replace it with electric tape, worst comes to worst. So now we just need to unwrap this. And I do have my flush cutters in case I need to cut it at some point, but it's better not to use cutters in case we nick a wire. Now we'll see that our motor cable comes free from the rest of the harness, and we can keep unraveling. And at this point, we'll get to the spring at the bottom of the stem. So we can actually pull this spring out to make sure we take all the tape off. There we go. Now that we have the tape off, we'll go up to the handlebars and do the same thing on the harness up there. Now we'll repeat the same process on the top part of the harness. So what we'll need to do is cut the zip ties from the hydro brake lines while making sure we're not cutting any of the actual wires. We can now take the cover out, just like we did at the bottom. There we go. Now that we have the cover out, we'll take the tape as well. We can now take the tape off as well. Now that we have all of our wires free, what we can do is take our ignition and our single dual switch, which I'll show you which connectors those are down below, and pull them out of our stem because we won't need them anymore. Now the two wires we'll need to take out are the single dual switch and the ignition cable. Now if you want to keep these components, you can fish these out of the stem by taking most of the wires out, but for the purpose of this video, we'll cut them and pull them out. So all you'll need to do is cut the wire with flush cutters and then pull them out from the top. Now, to make sure we're pulling the right wires, we're going to push these out and see which ones come first. So as we can see, we have our first one right here, and then if we continue pushing, we can see our second one right here. So now that we have our two wires out of the deck, we'll do the same thing up top on the handlebars. Now to figure out which wires to pull, we'll just trace from our ignition and dual single switch, and then start gently pulling these wires up. There we go, that's one. And two. Now that the two old component wires are out of the stem and deck, we can start removing all the components from the handlebars and installing the V3 kit. Now to start the process on the handlebars, what we'll need to do is remove the grips, the brake handles, the bell, and the ignition on the left side. And for this, we'll need a 4mm Allen key to remove the grip and brake handle. And to not cause any stress on the brake sensor or the hydro line, I'm going to remove the knuckle completely instead of trying to slide out the brake handle at the end of the bar. There we go. Now we can put the knuckle back on our brake handle just to make sure we don't lose any of the screws. Now we can take a Phillips head screwdriver and remove our bell. And then finally our ignition, which if I turn the stem around, we'll need a 2.5mm Allen key. Just like this, we'll slide it all the way off. We'll now move to the other side of the handlebars and take the components off there as well. Now we can repeat the process for the grip and the brake handle. We can now take our 3mm Allen key and remove our old display. Now that it's loosened up, we'll disconnect the COM cable just like this and slide the display off. Lastly, we'll remove our single dual switch using the same 3mm Allen key. Now to begin the installation of the V3 kit, what we'll need to do is remove the stem cap right here to install the display bracket. For this we'll need our 5mm Allen key. There we go. Now that we have the screw, we can take the cap off and we can now install our bracket using that same screw. Now for the bracket to be in a good position, we'll need to make sure that the holes for the display are in the front of the scooter. Next, we'll install the display with a screw and nut on either side of our bracket. Now we can start the nut finger tight just to hold it in place. And we'll put the second one in as well. There we go. Now we're going to be putting our two throttles on the handlebars. So throttle with the M or the region throttle will go on this side, and then our power throttle will go on the other side, just like this. Next, we can slide our brake handles back on. Same thing on the other side. There we go. So now we have our two throttles, our display, and our brake handles. What we'll need to do is pass our display wires inside the handlebars, just like this. And this is obviously all up to preference, but there's a little hole inside the handlebars right here. We're going to be passing the throttle wires through it just to tidy up the wiring. Same thing on the other side. Now we won't connect or adjust anything yet because we need to install our controller in the deck first, and then at the end we'll connect and adjust everything. Now to install the controller, we're going to need a thermal pad, the controller, and our battery connectors. So first we'll start by connecting all the wires to the controller, and for this we'll start with the COM cable. Next we'll move to the other side where we have all of our LEDs and brake sensor wire. So orange and gray is our brake sensor, which will connect to the white and red. Just like this. And then we'll take our deck LED wire, connect it to the red and black wires. So these two match in colors. Next, we'll take our rear LEDs, which is the shorter black and red wires, and connect them to the two yellow and black connectors, just like this. And lastly, we'll have our front LEDs, which will connect to the blue and black connector, and then the green and black connector. Now that all of our internal wires are connected, we can now connect our motor cables. Now, unlike the old controllers, we'll take our motor cable, push it into the deck, so out of the little side hole. There we go. And now that this is inside the deck, we can connect the controller to the front motor. Now you'll notice on the motor connectors, there's a little notch on one of the sides, and that's how it should be connected. Just like that. We'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll gently push our connectors through. We can now connect our rear motor to the controller. There we go. And now, as we can see, everything is connected properly. The last thing we'll need to do is put our converter on the controller and connect it to the battery to test. Just like that. And secondly, we'll connect our throttles to the display and the display to the COM cable to make sure that everything works as it should. Now that we've got the controller and the battery connected, what we can do is take our COM cable and plug it into our display. Now you'll see there's 3 wires coming out of the display, and the right one is the one that needs to plug into the COM cable. So this one right here. We'll match the 2 arrows together and plug it in. Next, we'll do our throttles. So as we can see, we have a male connector going to a female connector, and then the other side is vice versa, male coming from the display to the female going to the throttle. There we go. Now before we do anything with the scooter, we'll need to turn it on by pressing 10 times on the power button to calibrate the motors, to sync it with the controllers. Now this is a very crucial step because if we do miss this, it could mess up the calibration of the motors and burn connections. Now the error 3 will show up, which is completely normal. The motors will make some noise, which is completely normal as well. Just make sure to have the scooter off the ground to let the motors spin freely. Now that we've calibrated the motors, we know that the controller and display works properly. What we need to do now is test the throttle and regen, test the LEDs, make sure everything works properly, and then afterwards we'll be able to close up the deck and tidy up our wiring harnesses. We can now take our grip handles and install them back on the handlebars so we can put our components in the proper place. We can now tighten the brake handle. And lastly, we'll adjust our throttle. For this, we'll need a 3mm Allen key, and we'll just flip the rubber and insert it where the adjustment screw is. And now we'll repeat the process on the other side. Now that we've adjusted all of our handlebar components, the final component to adjust is our display. And what we'll need for this is a 7mm wrench and a 3mm Allen key. So as you can see, we have a nut inside as well as our screw outside. So we'll take our wrench, hold the nut in place, and tighten the screw to make sure our display is tight, but also adjust the display to your preference before you set it in place. Now we can see our display is nice and tight. Now that our display is secured in place, we'll test the LEDs, the throttle, and the regen just to make sure everything works perfectly before we close the deck off. So first we'll test the throttle and cycle through the gears just to make sure everything's working properly. Now keep in mind, out the box, it's possible that the kit is in kickstart mode, so you might have to swing the tire a little bit to get it to work. This is obviously all interchangeable in the app as well. So we'll press the throttle and spin the tire. As you can see, first gear is working properly. We'll test the regen. Regen works as well. 3 gears worked just like they should. We'll press the power button 3 times to put it into Ludo and test it again. So 2 clicks on the power button turns on all the lights. Everything seems to be working. And now we'll click the signal lights to see if they're working. Now when we turn on the signal lights, as you can see, the tail lights are flashing, the side LEDs are flashing, and the headlights as well. That is because this prototype controller has been configured this way. The production controller, however, will be configured with the side LEDs in mind. Now that we've tested everything and everything works as it should, we can start tidying up our wire harnesses. For this, I'm going to be using electric tape, and starting from the bottom here, wrap it around all of our wires to secure them from the elements. Now that we have our electrical tape wrapped around the harness, we can take our dust shield or the harness cover and put it back on. Now you'll notice we're going to need a lot less of this dust cover than we did, just because of how the wires and their length changed with the new components. cut the rest off and now push the harness back into the stem so everything's nice and tidy. We'll now take zip ties and secure everything in place. Now we'll put one on top right here. And we'll also secure the throttle wires, brake sensor wires, and brake lines up top. And we'll cut off the extra bits. So now that everything up top is tidied up, secured in place, and covered, we'll move down to the deck and install everything. Now the first thing we'll need to do around the deck is reinstall our deck tray. For this, we'll need to make sure we're not pinching any wires under the deck, so we'll gently pull on all the wires coming from the front to make sure nothing is getting stuck. After that, we can glide our deck tray back in place and screw it in. Now that we've reinstalled our deck tray, we can make sure that our wire harness has enough slack to turn to either side. As we can see, it does. So what we'll do now is take electric tape and wrap it up again. So now that we have enough of the harness covered, we can cut our piece of electric tape and push the wires back into the deck where they're supposed to be while we wrap the dust shield. Now we'll put back the dust cover on the wire harness. Now that our dust cover is installed, we can zip tie it in place. Now we'll cut off the extra bits. And tuck them in to hide them. Now that we're done with our harness, we can get into the deck itself. Now before we put the controller and battery in the deck, we'll need to put a thermal pad against the controller to reduce any chance of overheating whatsoever. Now that we have our thermal pad, our controller, what we'll need to do is lift up our wires and insert our controller inside the front cavity of the scooter. This is because we need enough space for the battery to go in. Now we'll put the battery in, making sure we're not pinching any wires, just like that. And finally, we'll connect our two charging ports. That's one, and that's two. So now we'll put the wires inside of the deck. Now these connectors can be zip tied for extra reassurance that they won't disconnect, but with normal use they should be all right connected the way they are. Now that all of our wires are in the deck, our battery is there, every connector is plugged in, we can put our deck plate back on. To put the deck plate back on, we'll just slide it under the 3 screws on each side of the deck and push it in place to align it with all the holes. So now we can put our deck screws back in. We can now reinstall our deck hook. And last piece of advice, as we can see here, where the wire harness goes into the deck, so it's always good to put some hot glue around to seal the hole or some gasket maker. The last step will be to put the grip tape back on the deck. Just like this. There we go. And that's how you install the V3 kit for the Apollo Ghost.